You know, the only downside to my new dress that I'm wearing all the time now is that the sleeves are a little bit too short. You know, otherwise it's pretty neat. It's pretty comfortable to wear traditional clothes. Especially the thermic properties are very good, you know. Like the wool is actually quite, you know, when it's cold, it is quite warm for a long time. I think if you're not too weak, then you can go up to like 0 degrees with just wearing like an undershirt. I'm like wearing an undershirt and a t-shirt, a white t-shirt, and then over my white t-shirt I wear this shirt here, this traditional cotton shirt, and over I wear this cardigan, or how do you call it in English? This woolen jacket. It's 100% wool, and I can go up to like around 0 degrees without feeling cold. And the good thing, now it's around probably 16 to 18, maybe 20 in the sun, 20 degrees, and I'm not hot yet, and it can get a little bit warmer, you know, into the 20s degrees Celsius. I'm talking about Celsius here, and I'm not feeling too hot. So I imagine natural sheep wool does have these properties because the sheep themselves, they cannot just you know, die freezing in the winter, but they can also not suffocate in summer, you know, so they need a certain threshold, a certain you know, range of temperatures they can support. So I think that's the reason why these traditional wool clothes have such good quality, such good thermic qualities. Same goes to the socks. You know, I'm wearing these knee socks, and then these Kniebundhose, what you call in German. It's a leather. It's a leather trousers. I don't know if you can see it, but and they are super comfortable. They're just amazing. I don't know. It just feels great to wear. It's like it's literally a second skin. You know this phrase when you say, "Wow, these new trousers, they fit like a second skin." They literally are a second skin. It's a goat skin, this one, and yeah, they last pretty much forever, and they look cool and are super comfortable. And another pro side is that you never have to wash them. You don't really wash the woolen clothes. I think this is another special property of sheep's wool, that, I don't know, they don't smell easily. They still have their own like sheep-like smell a little bit, and I don't know what kind of stuff there is in there, but maybe it's some kind of disinfectant or something, but they don't stink easily. Maybe also because you don't sweat easily in them, because they naturally exchange air, you know, it's like a natural air conditioning. In these synthetic clothings, you always have this, you know, the air is contained and it doesn't really breathe, and this is why you sweat so easily and it gets wet inside, but not in this one. The only downside to that is that in the wind it can get really cold, you know, because it lets air through easily. It gets cold in the wind. Another surprising upside is that it's remarkably water resistant, you know. So if it's pouring, how do you say, buckets and puppies or whatever, I don't know the word in English, but if it's pouring down a lot, then obviously you get soaked. But if it's just drizzling a little bit or snowing, you don't get wet easily, because like on the sheep, it pearls off a little bit, you know, so that's also nice. But as I told you, in the shop they didn't have a really perfect size on me for me. So it's still a little bit short on the sleeves. It sometimes looks a little bit odd, but I don't know. Sometimes it's also a little bit longer, maybe depending on the weather conditions, because it also expands and contracts a little bit. So I don't know. Anyways, I found what I've also found interesting with these sizes is that nowadays you pretty much only have factory-made clothing or standardized sizes for clothing. And back in the days, when around each corner there was like a seamstress shop, or a seam, I don't know how do you say in English again, like a sewer or a clothes maker, and you had it around every corner, and you would just go there and he would take your measurements and just make you a perfectly fitting garment, So this is also kind of lost nowadays. Another interesting thing about even older clothing, the ancient clothing, in the ancient times they usually just had some kind of wrap, some kind of cloth, some kind of carpet or blanket, or cape. Yeah, cape is the right word. In ancient times they would just have a cape that they would then secure with fibula, with brooches, and this would be their cold protection, or anything, or weather protection. And otherwise they would just go bare on top, or just maybe have a plain shirt or something. But the cape is even better when it comes to sizes, because obviously it fits on everybody. You just take a cape and you wrap around and clip it together with a brooch. So that's the advantage of even older clothing. Yeah. So in creating your own system again, where you can be free and independent from the globalized, brain-dead companies that enslave us. One thing to be free of that would be to start making your own clothes again. And I'm always reminded of Gandhi's homespun movement with this, because you just strip these companies of their revenues, and then they don't have this much money to support all this propaganda anymore and all their business. And you have to understand that it really doesn't take all too much, because the margins in many industries, the margins are already quite small, and they are calculating with very small percentages, So for example, if they have like a turnover of $1 billion, for them to make a profit, it is enough to make like 0.1% of that in actual surplus, So if you strip them of a considerable part of their market share, they sometimes already collapse, and one reason why they are applying so many monopolistic business practices is because they're already running on a quite unstable system, and they are just trying to squeeze a little bit more out of it to barely stay alive, So I think many of these big companies are probably already in big trouble, and sometimes it doesn't take much to topple them, and it doesn't take arms or huge numbers again, Sometimes it's just a critical mass of people that starts doing their own stuff again, making their own stuff. I compare this to the weaver's fate. Why are they women, like the Norns? Why are they women and they weave the tapestry of fate? Why is fate connected to clothing? We've seen it in India. They are pretty much, I think they're pretty much independent now. At least from the British Empire. At least they're not completely anglicized. I think they still speak English, but they still also have their native languages. But if it wasn't for Gandhi and the homespun movement, they would probably be even more colonized, and even more exterminated and changed and assimilated into the English culture. Another thing that I was thinking about. Do you remember Dune? The desert planet? Dune, there are a lot of parallels to our world. And one of these parallels is that there's this desert planet, and there's a resource on this planet called spice that is needed for interstellar travel. And the big empires of the galaxy, they need this resource, and it's only found there in the desert. They need this resource to support their fleets and to keep up their dominion. And there's this war for this planet. And the planet is, interestingly, the planet is called Arrakis, which is surprisingly similar to Iraq, which, like the Middle East, is also this battlefield for world power, because it also has all the oil, which is also a resource that is mainly needed for mobility, for supplying airplanes and tanks and ships and military and industry. So this is a parallel, but an even more interesting parallel or metaphor. Well, let's start with the second interesting metaphor. The second interesting metaphor is that in this world they have all these high-tech weapons, ranged weapons and all this stuff, guns, probably, I don't know, laser, I don't know what they have, laser guns probably, but they also have developed a personal shield, a protective shield. And this protective shield works that it stops high velocity projectiles or high velocity attacks. So you cannot pierce it with something that shoots quickly and powerfully, but you can pierce it very slowly with a dagger. And this is why even in this futuristic world, they even do close combat. They still do close combat with daggers. And the interesting metaphor for our time is that people try to amass power, political power, military power, to gain control over something. But sometimes maybe it's more powerful to do something very slowly and something very unexpectedly and something peaceful. We say in German, der stete Tropfen hüllt den Stein. And the steady drop hollows out the rock. So water has a lot of power over time. It's also what they are using against us, by the way, slowly degenerating us with steady drops of propaganda. But this is something that we can turn around. And maybe there is a weapon that is very slow and very small and very unexpected and unaccounted for in their calculations, that can topple the whole thing. You know, we have all the creativity. Our enemies, you know, the secret services, the big companies, the big corporations and banks who control this planet now, they are investing a lot of resources in keeping us under control and molding us to fit their desired image of reality. But we still have all the creativity at our disposal. Just need to apply it. And we also grow, we kind of grow resistances, you know, psychological immunities against their attacks, you know. They're like a virus, but we are the antibodies, you know. If the people, the folk, is the body that is attacked by their psychological viruses, then we, the individual people, emerge as antibodies to this poison, and we can neutralize it. The only thing that we need to do that is, or the first thing that we need to do that is to be aware of their psychological attack. And then we just have to be creative, and we don't necessarily have to be hateful or depressed or angry, you know. When you go into a ring to fight a boxing match, you're not necessarily angry at your opponent, you know. Even if he dominates you, you can get a thrill out of the competition. So why don't we accept the challenge and fight back with means that are unexpected? Not violent means, not necessarily. You know, in the 19th century there was a lot of poetry. And that's kind of lost. And that brings me to the next point, which is also an interesting metaphor from Dune. You know, in Dune, they have a secret weapon that finally defeats the Empire, the Harkonnen Empire, this degenerate Harkonnen brutal empire. And the noble Atreides, they have these weapons called sound modules. And with these sound modules, they can channel their voices and their emotions into an impulse, into an energy, and that strikes. So they can shoot with their voices, they can amplify their voices to create bolts of energy that are very powerful and that destroy the enemy. And that sounds kind of similar to what they did in the Baltics during the end of the Soviet Union. They started a singing revolution. You have to look this up. The Baltics are the region in Europe that was only Christianized in the, I think, in around 1500, you know. And in the 1900s, like around 1800, it already turned back again, you know. The Christianization was already kind of levied and reversed. So they weren't Christian for a long time, for a very long time, and they remained very pagan, and they have kept a lot of pagan traditions, including the ancient habits of singing. And I've read a book about like a compilation of Latvian songs, folk songs, And it said in the introduction that back in the days, the Latvians had songs for almost everything, for almost every aspect of life. They had multiple songs. So for example, when they were working in the fields, they had songs for all the different works that they had to do, all the different labors. They had songs to accompany them in even different varieties of songs. And even for something like making a basket, they had a song for each individual step in the process of basket making. So they could accompany their entire life and day-to-day work with music. And they would invent new songs, and they would memorize hundreds and thousands of songs and pass them on to their friends and family, brothers and sisters. And it was a very important part and aspect of their life. And this was deeply rooted still within them in 1980, in the 1980s. And here's another parallel to our time. The Soviet Union literally tried to exterminate them, deport them to work camps, and replace the native Latvian population with Russians and other people from the Soviet Union, and to Russify them and force them to abandon their own language and learn Russian and assimilate them into this Russian empire, this multicultural empire. And this is exactly what the EU is doing with Germany at the moment and with all EU countries. They are slowly replacing us with immigrants, and they will soon start to replace our language and make us speak English. This is something that you can observe in the South African Union, which is also a multicultural empire. And they are already starting, since Mandela came to power, they have successively, continuously started to force everybody to speak English and to turn all the different universities into English-speaking only universities. So what they did in Latvia to combat this, they went back to their traditional songs, and they also invented new songs that would fit with the modern times and that would express their inner feelings that were censored, so they were not allowed to speak openly about the political situation and about patriotism and about remaining an ethnic group, so that was forbidden. It was anti-communist. And this is exactly what we have now in Europe and also in America. Now, what the Soviets could not forbid was they couldn't forbid them singing publicly children's songs, So the powerful thing about songs and that go very deep into your heart is that you can circumvent the propaganda with this, because if you speak openly about political subjects, then you are walking in a minefield. You cannot really get to your peers. And in Latvia, there were also the people who were kind of pro-socialism and who believed in the message of communism, and others didn't. But what really united them was their love for nature and their love for their homeland and their love for their native language and their songs. And then when they were manifesting, when they were marching in the streets, they would sing their songs, and this would unite them all. And the Russians couldn't really understand, even if they understood the words, they could not understand the meaning. This is also something similar of what they did in Eastern Germany during that time. My father used to organize these poetry readings in his house. And I remember he once had a poet from Eastern Germany who was ostracized for speaking out against the system. And he couldn't become what he wanted to become and was expelled from university. And then he just became a writer for children's books. And interestingly, in the children's books, he could place all the system, all the critical ideas critical to the system, he could place in there, and the censors, they wouldn't notice. And so when parents were reading these children's books to their children, they couldn't help but smile, and they got the message. So it was both a story for little children and a message for adults, which closes the circle, back to the fairy tales. Because censorship is as old as, they did it for thousands of years. They censored us. I believe we can break out of this. And a very important thing to do is to stop listening to their music. Stop listening to commercial music, MTV music and all this stuff. It's such a powerful force. Resonance. Resonance can topple bridges, there were bridges where people were marching on a bridge, and from the continuous beating of their boots, this would create a sound wave, a frequency, and then the bridge came down. I don't know if this is a meme or just a story, but there is this thing, they can break glass. Singers can, who can sing in a very high pitch, they can break glass with their voices alone. And just think about that, how resonance works, how you just need to find the right frequency to to bring down a structure of any size. It doesn't matter how big, you just need the right tone. If you're a patriot, you probably cherish traditional music and dance. You kind of like it. You kind of think, yeah, that's cool, that's based, that's traditional, should be done. But you don't realize yet how important that really is. You don't realize yet how immensely important that is. How traditional dance is an institution to select your perfect mating partner and to ensure stable relationships with many kids. How traditional dancing can save you decades, years, sometimes decades of trial and error with your girlfriends and your relationships. If you grow up dancing regularly in your community, without all the hassle of modern relationships, you will find a person that resonates very well with you, and you just marry that person when you are mature enough and you can support her and you're strong enough to bring up children, and then you have children. And I think that works quite fine. And then you just stick to that person. And the traditional music, I've just elaborated on that, how music and resonance works, how it unites people, and how it can divide people as well. The modern music basically has a very quick cycle of renovation, which leads to the situation that every generation grows up with a different style of music. So every 10 years, every 5 years, the standard style of music changes in the society, and people of different ages cannot harmonize together. They cannot sing the same songs and feel connected, and have fun together. This system separates the people so crazy, like so insane, and it completely it makes resistance to an oppressive system completely impossible. And now they added on top of that, they added all the multiculturalism, they added foreign groups who have, again, completely different tastes of music and musical cultures, It's such an effective system of keeping people under control, this divide and conquer. It's basically the perfection of divide and conquer, There's nothing better than that, You don't need arms. They control you with music. It's so obvious by now. And this is why they are shutting down on traditional cultures and ridiculing it. I grew up with the idea that traditional music is the most boring and backward stuff and the most ridiculous bullshit, because we were shown this Musikantenstadel programs on TV where they just take the worst and the most how do you say, the most ridiculous people singing these phony songs, playback, reenacting and making funny movements, and I don't know how to say it, but it was always this stuff for old people, Now real traditional music, once you get in touch with real traditional music, again with choirs who sing old songs in high quality, that's a totally different thing, it's so beautiful. I found these old recordings from GDR times, from these youth choirs and these radio choirs who recorded these traditional songs, and they are so amazing and beautiful. And they're also, the content, their words are constructive, they sing about nature, about love, about possible love, also about funny things, about dancing, about Christmas and the seasons, and about, there are a lot of children's songs, about craftsmen, and about dancing, about birds, and sometimes about mystical stuff a little bit, nature, mysteries, and some things that you cannot easily interpret, but mostly they're quite clear and quite simple. Also about sad things. And there are millions. I have a book at home that is like 1,000 songs, 1,000 German folk songs. And then I have other books, and I've bought a lot of books in antique bookstores with traditional German songs, and I don't know most of them. And I just realized how much was lost, in these wars, and in the modernization and occupation of Germany, and in the brainwashing. So much was lost. It was a little bit similar to the east, to the Baltics, where we had songs for everything, not for everything, but for so many things. Like each different craft had their own songs. The carpenters had their songs, the masons, the bakers, the hunters, the field workers, the sewers, seamstresses. They all had their own songs that they would sing while working. They tried to sing a song in a factory with all the noises there. Tried to sing a song in an office. Tried to sing a song in a supermarket, working in a supermarket, where you are also constantly bombarded with this soothing music that makes you buy more goods. It's so weird, man, what they've done to us. And in Germany, most of the songs that you hear are English songs. An old guy, a refugee from East Prussia that I met on a meeting with East Prussian refugees, he told me that after the war in Bavaria, in the Western occupation zone, the Americans put in this law where they had to play a certain amount of English-speaking songs in the radios, and they were only allowed to play like one German song every 20 English songs, or like every 50, or I don't know how much the number, but they strictly regulated how many German songs could be played. And this is until now, so this is still. Most of our songs that you hear on the radio are English songs, and the few German songs that you hear are from phony new bands that just imitate the English stuff. They just imitate this English rock music and basically everything. All our media just imitates Hollywood and imitates American media products that we consume since childhood. There's really nothing genuinely German on our radio or on our TV, not really. The interesting thing is that many of these technologies, like filmmaking, cinema, radio, certain filming techniques, they were all invented in the 20s and in the early 20th century. Like many people who invented these kinds of technologies and techniques were Germans. And these media techniques and information transmission techniques are now used against us on a gigantic scale, It would have probably been better if we never invented them. Same with the printing press, Books and magazines and newspapers, the Gutenberg Bible. The printing press is a German invention. And it's now used to destroy Germans, to defame them, to make them compliant in accepting their own replacement in their own home country. Like the technology that we invented is now used to destroy us. Isn't that ironic? How we opened Pandora's box. It's like Prometheus, who brought the fire, illegally gave the humans the fire.